Hello everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. I moved into the building on Euclid Avenue because it was cheap and close to the hospital where I worked nights. It was the kind of decision you make when you are tired and practical and not thinking long-term. Old brick, narrow hallways, yellowed paint that smelled faintly of dust and bleach. The place had history in the worst way, layers of other people's lives pressed into the walls. You could hear everything. Toilets flushing, phones vibrating on nightstands, coughing through the vents. Privacy was an illusion, but I told myself it was temporary. I worked 12-hour night shifts 4 nights a week. By the time I got home, my body was humming with exhaustion and adrenaline. I would climb the stairs slowly, unlock my door, and collapse into the same routine. Shoes off by the mat, scrub my hands at the sink until my skin stung, eat something small, then bed. I slept lightly during the day, always half aware of the building settling around me. The footsteps started during my first week. They were directly above my bedroom, in Unit 312. I noticed them because they began at the same time every night, just after I got home and lay down. Around 20:15 a.m., the ceiling would creak, and then the sound of slow, deliberate walking would move from one end of the apartment to the other. Not pacing, not restless, measured steps. Heel first, then toe, with a pause between each one. Back and forth, back and forth. At first, I assumed it was coincidence. Someone else on a schedule, someone else unable to sleep. The building was full of odd hours, but the pattern never changed. The steps always started at the same time and always stopped around 2:45, 30 minutes exactly. No music, no TV, no other noises from above. Just walking. I tried to ignore it. I wore earplugs. I turned on a fan. But once you notice something like that, it gets under your skin. My brain began to track the steps automatically. I could tell where he was in the apartment by the sound. Near the kitchen. Turning around near the bedroom wall. The pauses grew familiar like a metronome. One morning after a long shift, I crossed paths with him in the stairwell. He was coming down as I was going up, both of us moving slowly, wrapped in our own fatigue. He looked ordinary. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Clean clothes, tired eyes, neat hair. He gave a small, polite smile that felt practiced. His gaze lingered on me a fraction longer than necessary, like he was confirming something. I remember the chill that moved through me afterward, not because of anything obvious, but because my routine suddenly felt visible. After that, the building began to feel smaller. The first time my door was unlocked, I assumed it was my mistake. I was tired all the time. My memory blurred around the edges. I stood in the hallway with my hand on the knob, feeling the door move when it should not have. Inside, nothing was disturbed. No missing items, no drawers opened. I locked it carefully and checked the deadbolt twice before going to bed. It happened again 3 nights later. Same thing. Unlocked door, untouched apartment. I began to feel foolish for being unsettled. I told myself it was stress. Night shifts do that to you. They distort your sense of normal. Then I noticed my shoes. I always left them side by side near the door, toes pointing toward the wall. When I came home one morning, they were lined up neatly, toes pointing outward, laces tucked in. It was a small change, but it hit me hard. Someone had been inside. Someone had taken the time to notice how I usually left them and then changed it. Another night, I found the sink running in the bathroom. Just a thin stream of cold water, like it had been left deliberately, not forgotten. The mirror above it was fog-free, wiped clean in a single vertical streak down the center. I started checking my apartment obsessively. Closets, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Every time I came home, my heart would race until I was sure I was alone. I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed of being watched from corners I could not see. I bought a cheap camera online and mounted it above my door, angled toward the hallway. It felt paranoid, but also necessary. I told myself it was temporary, just until I could calm down. The footage from the first night showed nothing unusual, until just after 3 in the morning. The hallway light flickered on, and he appeared in frame. Seeing him on the screen was worse than seeing him in person. He moved quietly, confidently, like he belonged there. He knelt in front of my door and leaned forward until his ear pressed flat against the wood. His face was relaxed, almost content. His mouth moved slowly, forming words I could not hear. He stayed there for a long time, barely shifting his weight, breathing steadily. When he finally stood up, he reached out and turned my doorknob gently, testing it, then returned upstairs without looking at the camera. I watched the clip over and over, my hands shaking. There was no mistaking it. This was not a misunderstanding or a mistake. This was deliberate. I went to the police after my next shift, still in my scrubs, eyes burning from lack of sleep. I showed them the footage. They listened, took notes, made phone calls. An officer went to Unit 312 later that day. There was no answer. Building management pulled the records and told them the unit had been vacant for months, undergoing slow renovations that kept getting delayed. No one was supposed to be living there. That explanation did nothing to calm me. It made everything worse. That night, the footsteps did not come. The silence above me was heavy, unnatural. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for the familiar creak that never arrived. My body was rigid, every sense stretched thin. The absence of sound felt like pressure, like something holding its breath. Sometime after 2015, I became aware of another sensation, a faint warmth against my neck. The sound of slow, careful breathing, close enough that I could feel it disturb the fine hairs on my skin. My mind refused to accept it at first. I lay frozen, heart pounding so hard it hurt, trying to convince myself it was imagination, exhaustion, a trick of nerves. Then I smelled him. Clean soap, faint metal, the same sterile scent that clung to the hospital corridors. I did not scream. I did not move. I focused on staying alive. What happened next is burned into my memory in sharp, clear pieces. The weight of a hand pressing me down. The precision of his movements. The way he avoided my arms and legs, controlling me without panic or haste. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had planned it. He had been living in the building the entire time, using the vacant unit as cover, moving through maintenance access points and unused stairwells. He had studied my schedule, my habits, the thinness of the walls. The walking above my bedroom was never random. It was timing, conditioning. He wanted me to expect him somewhere else at a specific time, so I would stop listening for him where I actually was. He had been inside my apartment many times before that night. He knew where everything was. He knew how the lock felt when it turned. He knew how to stand so the floor would not creak. The camera had not stopped him. It had only confirmed to him that I was watching the door instead of the rest of the apartment. I survived because of a mistake he made. A small one. He underestimated how alert constant fear makes you. When he shifted his weight, just enough to adjust his balance, I moved. Not to fight, not to run, but to disrupt. I forced noise into the moment, enough to break his control. Enough to make him choose escape over completion. He was gone by the time the neighbors pounded on the door. They caught him 2 weeks later in another building near the hospital. Same pattern. Night workers. Old construction. Thin walls. He had done this before. He would have done it again. I did not move back to Euclid Avenue. I changed my schedule. I changed my routines. I still wake up at 2015 some nights, heart racing, listening for footsteps that are no longer there. Silence has never sounded the same to me since. I was driving east through Nevada in late October, the kind of night that drains color from everything. The sky was a low, hard black, pressed flat by stars that looked sharp enough to cut. The road was Route 50, the loneliest stretch I had ever willingly taken. 2 lanes laid across a desert that never seemed to change no matter how long I stared into it. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel through cold air, and beyond that tunnel there was nothing. No houses, no fences, no glow from towns, just sagebrush, rock, and the suggestion of mountains standing back from the road like patient animals. I had left Fallon after dusk, planning to push through to Ely before sleeping. I was alone, as I usually was on work trips, the car loaded with the small mess of a life lived out of hotel rooms. The heater hummed. The dashboard clock glowed a soft green. I remember checking it often, more out of habit than concern, as if time itself might slip away in a place like that. I was alert but relaxed, the kind of alertness that comes from long-distance driving, when your body handles the car and your mind drifts just above it. Around mile marker 86, something moved at the edge of my headlights. At first I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe, and my foot lifted slightly off the gas. Then I saw arms, pale shapes cutting the dark, waving in wide, urgent arcs. A pickup truck sat on the shoulder, angled badly, hazard lights blinking an amber rhythm against the emptiness. The truck looked old and tired, the kind you see everywhere in rural Nevada, dust permanently baked into the paint. The man stood near the front of it, stepping into the road just enough to make himself impossible to ignore. I slowed. I remember telling myself that it was cold, that it was late, that this was the kind of road where you helped people, because there might not be anyone else for hours. I remember thinking about my father, who always stopped, who believed that refusing help said something bad about who you were. I remember the brief, sharp thought that this was a bad idea, followed immediately by the quieter thought that nothing ever happens. I pulled over. The night rushed in as soon as I stopped, a deep silence broken only by the ticking of my engine and the blink of his hazard lights. The cold felt sudden and aggressive when I cracked my window. He leaned down, close enough that I could smell oil and cigarettes and something sour beneath it, like clothes worn too long without washing. His face looked ordinary in my headlights. Mid-40s maybe. Stubble, lines at the corners of his mouth that could have been from smiling or from squinting into sun. His eyes reflected the light strangely, not in a dramatic way, just flat and watchful. He gestured back at his truck and made the universal motions of car trouble. I nodded. He motioned down the road, toward Austin, the next town, explaining with his hands and expressions that his radiator hose had blown and that he needed a ride. The distance meant nothing to him. 30 miles, just another stretch of dark. I hesitated long enough to feel foolish about it, then reached over and unlocked the passenger door. He climbed in, bringing the smell of him with him, filling the small space of the car. He shut the door carefully, not slamming it, and settled in like he expected to be there for a while. I pulled back onto the highway, the truck and its blinking lights shrinking quickly behind us until they were swallowed by dark. For the first few minutes, everything felt normal. Too normal. The road stretched ahead, my headlights steady. I focused on driving, on the thin white lines sliding under the car. I told myself I had done the right thing. He sat quietly, looking straight ahead, his hands folded loosely in his lap. I could feel his presence beside me, heavy and contained. Then he started asking questions. They came casually, spaced out, the kind of things people ask to pass time. He wanted to know how long I had owned my car. He asked about where I was headed, about work, about money. The questions were not aggressive, but they were oddly specific, drifting toward details that felt private. He asked if anyone knew my route, if someone was expecting me at a certain time. Each question tightened something in my chest, a slow ratcheting sensation that I tried to ignore. I answered, but not truthfully. I rounded down numbers, changed destinations, invented a person who was waiting for me. I kept my voice even, my eyes on the road. I told myself this was just caution, that it was smart to be vague with strangers. When I glanced at him, I saw him watching me, not in a threatening way, but with an intensity that felt appraising, as if he were taking inventory. At some point, he laughed. It was a soft sound, almost affectionate, and it made the hair on my arms lift. He said something then that landed wrong, something about liking this road, because of how empty it was, because of how easy it was for people to vanish without much notice. He said it lightly, like a joke, but there was pleasure in it, a warmth that did not belong. The words settled in the car like smoke. My mouth went dry. I felt suddenly, acutely aware of the fact that we were alone in a moving bubble of light, surrounded by miles of nothing. I thought about how far we were from help, how little anyone would see if something went wrong. The road signs flashed by, reflective green, counting down the miles to Austin with a patience that felt mocking. I told myself not to panic. Panic would make me stupid. I slowed my breathing. I adjusted the heater. I did small, normal things to convince myself that I was in control. I started looking for options, for places where I could stop, where there might be light or other cars. The pull-offs along Route 50 are sparse and uninviting, just gravel patches with small signs. But I remembered one not far ahead, a rest area that was little more than a wide spot with a concrete barrier. I pretended to miss a turn, letting the car drift slightly before correcting, then signaling and slowing as if confused. I guided us into the pull-off, the headlights sweeping across empty gravel and a single picnic table. The darkness beyond the headlights felt thick, close. I brought the car to a stop, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Before I could do anything else, he moved. His arm crossed the space between us, reaching not for his own door but for mine. His hand closed around the handle, fingers pale in the dash light. For a split second, everything froze, my mind narrowing to that hand, that simple, terrible intention. I reacted without thinking. My foot slammed down on the gas, the engine roaring in the sudden quiet. The car lurched forward, gravel spraying, the pull-off dropping away behind us as we shot back onto the highway. His hand slipped off the handle, his body thrown back into the seat. I did not look at him. I did not slow down. I kept my eyes locked on the road, the speed climbing past what was safe, past what I had ever driven on that stretch before. He did not shout. He did not try to grab me again. The absence of noise was almost worse. I drove like that for miles, my muscles locked, my hands numb on the wheel. When I finally glanced at the passenger seat, it was empty. At some point, without my noticing, he had opened his door and stepped out, leaving the car, while it was still moving enough to let him disappear back into the dark. I slowed only when my vision started to blur, when the road began to swim. I pulled over again, this time without signaling, and sat there shaking, the engine idling too loudly in the night. I locked the doors. I checked the back seat, the mirrors, every shadow. There was nothing but desert and my own reflection in the glass, pale and wild-eyed. I did not stop in Austin. I drove straight through, past the darkened buildings, past the single gas station with its lights buzzing. I kept going until Ely, until there were more cars, more people, until the night felt less personal. I checked into a motel with trembling hands and did not sleep. Every sound outside my door sent my heart racing. I kept seeing his hand on the door handle, over and over, as if my mind were trying to understand it by replaying it. In the morning, with the thin, washed-out light of Nevada sun coming through the curtains, I felt foolish and exhausted. The fear dulled, replaced by a creeping sense of embarrassment. Nothing had actually happened, I told myself. I had scared myself with stories. I showered, packed, and sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone while the coffee maker hissed. That was when I saw the news alert. A body had been found along Route 50, near mile marker 83, just a few miles west of where I had stopped. A woman, unidentified at first, discovered by a trucker who had pulled over at dawn. The article was brief, cautious, but it mentioned that investigators were looking into reports of a hitchhiker in the area the night before. The description was close enough that my stomach dropped. The same age range, the same general look, the same stretch of road. I read the article 3 times, my hands cold despite the coffee steaming beside me. Details filled in as the day went on. She had been driving alone. She had stopped to help someone. Her car was found abandoned farther down the road. The rest was what you would expect, what you never want to imagine. There was no mention of an arrest. No mention of a suspect. The pieces slid into place with a sickening clarity. The questions he had asked, the pleasure in his voice when he talked about the road, the timing, the miles. I understood then that my fear had not been an overreaction. It had been recognition. Some animal part of me catching a pattern my rational mind wanted to dismiss. I called the number listed in the article and spoke to a tired, sounding officer. I told him everything, haltingly at first, then in a rush. He listened without interrupting, asked for descriptions, times, locations. He thanked me. He did not promise anything. When I hung up, I felt hollowed out, like something essential had been scraped away. I finished my trip, but I did not enjoy it. Every empty road felt hostile. Every stopped car made my pulse jump. I replayed that night endlessly, measuring how close I had come to a different ending. I thought about the woman found near mile marker 83, about how she might have made the same calculation I did, how she might have believed in being kind, in doing the right thing. The randomness of it all pressed on me, heavy and unfair. Months later, I read a follow-up piece. The case remained unsolved. There were theories, rumors, talk of a drifter who moved through rural highways, of similar incidents stretching back years. Nothing concrete. The road kept its secrets. I still drive long distances for work. I still cross empty places where help feels far away. But I do not stop anymore. Not for anyone waving in the dark. I plan my routes to avoid Route 50 when I can, and when I cannot, I drive it in daylight, with the sun flattening shadows and making everything visible. At night, that road belongs to something else, to the people who understand how emptiness can be used. What stays with me most is not the fear, though that was intense. It is the realization of how ordinary it all was. No warning signs, no dramatic moment where the world announced danger. Just a man on the side of the road, a decision made out of habit and belief, and a hand reaching quietly for the wrong door. I sublet the room on Knickerbocker Avenue because it was cheap and close enough to the cafes where I could work all day without buying more than one coffee. Freelancing had turned my sense of time into something soft and unreliable. Days blurred together. Nights stretched. The apartment sat above a closed laundromat, the windows always faintly vibrating from the elevated train a few blocks away. It felt temporary, which was exactly what I wanted. There were 3 other roommates. 2 rotated in and out, people with schedules that barely overlapped mine. The 3rd was Eli. He had been there the longest. He took the smallest room, but treated the apartment like it was a controlled environment. Everything was labeled. At first, it felt like a harmless quirk. The spice rack had white stickers with black block letters. Paprika, cumin, oregano. The cereal boxes had labels on the sides, even though the brands were printed in tall text already. The cleaning supplies under the sink had dates written on them in pen, with notes about dilution ratios. The knives were the part that stuck with me. Each one had a thin strip of tape around the handle with a name written on it. Chef, bread, utility, pairing. Even the cheap serrated one we used for tomatoes had a label. Eli was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. He never played music, never slammed doors, never raised his voice because he never needed to. The apartment was always clean when he was home. Not just tidy, but reset, like a hotel room after checkout. Pillows squared, counters wiped until they squeaked. Shoes aligned by size. I told myself it was fine. Everyone copes differently. Freelancing teaches you to ignore small discomforts if rent is manageable. The first thing that bothered me happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I came back from the cafe earlier than usual, because my laptop battery had finally died. When I opened my bedroom door, I noticed the air felt wrong. It is hard to explain without sounding dramatic. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. But my desk chair was angled differently, slightly farther from the desk. The top drawer was not fully closed. Inside, the notebooks were no longer stacked the way I kept them. The pens were aligned, tips pointing in the same direction. I stood there longer than I needed to. I tried to reconstruct my last memory of the room. I had rushed out that morning. I might not have shut the drawer all the way. I might have nudged the chair with my knee. Memory is unreliable when you want it to be. Still, I started locking my door after that. Eli began paying more attention to me in ways that were subtle enough to feel accidental. I would notice him looking at my hands when I cooked, watching how much salt I used. I would catch him glancing at my phone screen reflection in the microwave door. He started leaving the apartment shortly after I did, and returning just before I came home, as if our schedules were slowly syncing. He began asking questions that were framed like casual curiosity. Questions about my sleep habits, about whether I woke up during the night, about whether I ever forgot things after drinking, about whether I locked my door consistently or just sometimes. The questions came spaced out over days, never grouped together, never urgent. Each one was easy to brush off on its own. I started feeling watched in a way that did not have a single source. The apartment was small, but it began to feel crowded. The hum of the refrigerator sounded louder at night. The train rattling through the distance felt closer. I found myself checking my bedroom window before bed, even though it faced a brick wall. One Saturday, I decided to clean the living room. It was something to do with my hands, something that made me feel like I had control over my space. I moved the couch to vacuum underneath it. That was when I found the notebook. It was thin black and soft covered. No label on the front, which made it stand out immediately. The pages were filled edge to edge with handwriting that was neat to the point of precision. Each entry had a date and a time, not just days but exact minutes. The entries were about me, times I left the apartment, times I returned, what I wore, what I ate, how long I showered, notes about my posture, notes about my facial expressions, comments on my productivity. There were remarks about my energy levels, my mood, whether I appeared distracted or focused. Some pages included floor plans of the apartment with markings showing where I spent most of my time. Near the back, the tone shifted. The observations became shorter, more frequent. The handwriting tightened. One line near the end stopped me cold. It stated that the subject was becoming aware. I sat on the floor for a long time holding that notebook. The apartment felt different after that, like a place that had already been compromised. I put the notebook back exactly where I found it, because I did not know what else to do. Moving it felt like acknowledging something I was not ready to face. I confronted Eli later that evening. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse him outright. I mentioned the notebook. I mentioned the notes. He reacted with calm interest, like I had brought up a book recommendation. He explained it away as a writing exercise, something about studying human routines and realism. He smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. That was when I knew I had waited too long. I slept with my door locked that night, or at least I believed I did. I remember checking the knob twice. I remember placing my phone face down on the nightstand and setting my alarm. I remember the weight of exhaustion settling into my limbs. I woke up before the alarm, not because of a sound, but because of a sensation. There was pressure on my chest, not heavy enough to hurt, but firm enough to pin me in place. My body refused to move. My eyes adjusted to the dark slowly, the way they do when you are scared and trying to stay quiet. Eli was leaning over me. He was close enough that I could see the pores on his skin, the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. His eyes were wide and focused, unblinking. He was not touching me. The pressure came from the way his weight hovered, just above my body, trapping the air. His face was arranged in something that might have been curiosity. He stayed there long enough for panic to fully bloom, and then curdle into something cold and sharp. He eventually leaned back and left the room, careful not to make noise. The door clicked softly behind him. I did not sleep again that night. In the morning, I packed everything I owned into 2 bags. I did not eat. I did not shower. I left without saying goodbye to anyone. I stayed with a friend in Queens for a while, sleeping on a couch that smelled like detergent and safety. A month later, I got a message from one of the rotating roommates. It was brief and confused. The apartment had been sealed by the police. One roommate was missing. Another was dead. Details were unclear, but the words homicide and investigation appeared enough times to make my hands shake. Eli was gone. The police reached out to me eventually. They asked about my time in the apartment. They asked about habits, routines, personalities. I told them everything. I told them about the labels, the notebook. The night I woke up with him hovering over me. They took notes. They thanked me. They said they would follow up. They never found him. Later, I learned more through public records and whispers passed between people who knew people. The roommate who died had injuries that suggested planning rather than rage. The missing roommate had last been seen entering the apartment late at night. The locks showed no signs of forced entry. Sometimes I still think about the notebook, about how carefully my life had been recorded without my knowledge, about how awareness was noted as a problem to be addressed. I moved apartments twice after that. I live alone now. I label nothing. I lock my door every night. I sleep lightly. I understand now that the danger was never sudden. It was patient. It was observant. It lived quietly in the background, taking notes, waiting for the right conditions. And the most unsettling part is knowing that if I had stayed even one more night, I would not be the one telling this story. I hunt deer every fall, the same way I have for years, in the same patch of public forest that sits between 2 forgotten farming towns. It is not remote wilderness. It is working land that people pass through without really seeing. Old logging roads, second-growth hardwoods, a creek that smells like wet leaves and iron. I know every bend of it. I know which trees hold moisture and which stay dry. I know where the deer cut across the ridge and where they bed down when the wind comes out of the west. Familiarity is part of why I like it. Nothing feels sudden there. Nothing is supposed to surprise me. I keep my tree stand up year-round. I lock it, but that is mostly symbolic. It sits about 20 feet up an oak with a split trunk, tucked just far enough off the main trail that hikers do not wander under it. Every August I clear shooting lanes and hang fresh straps. In September I put out trail cameras, not because I need them to hunt, but because I like patterns. I like seeing what moves when I am not there. It makes the woods feel honest. That year I hung 3 cameras. One watched the main trail, one covered a scrape line near the creek, and one I angled toward my stand itself, partly to catch deer passing under, and partly to see if anyone messed with my setup. I checked them once a week, swapping cards, standing there in the smell of damp bark and plastic housing warmed by the sun. The cards always showed what I expected: raccoons, coyotes, a bobcat once, moving like a shadow with bones, a few trespassing hikers who never looked up. The first wrong thing showed up on a Monday morning in mid-October. I had coffee on my desk and the house was quiet. I was scrolling through the trail cam footage on my laptop, half paying attention, tagging timestamps the way I always did. Night footage is mostly useless, just flashes of eyes and leaves. I was about to skip ahead when the screen filled with a face. It was not sudden movement. The camera did not trigger on him walking by. He walked straight up to it, slow enough that each step registered cleanly. He stood so close that the infrared washed his features flat. Adult male. Beard or stubble. Baseball cap pulled low. He leaned in until his eyes were level with the lens, and he smiled. It was not wide or exaggerated. It looked practiced, like he knew exactly how much to show. Then he reached up and touched the camera. I felt my shoulders tighten before I understood why. Hunters get their cameras stolen sometimes. People mess with them. That was not new. What made my stomach sink was the care in his movement. He did not yank it. He did not block the lens with his hand. He gently tilted it downward, adjusting the angle a few degrees at a time, then stepped back and looked up. The next frame showed my tree stand. I checked the timestamp. 2:11 a.m. I sat there longer than I meant to, replaying it, telling myself it was a fluke. Maybe he was a curious hiker. Maybe he thought the camera was his. Maybe he adjusted it out of some twisted courtesy. All of those thoughts came easily because I needed them too. What did not come easily was explaining the smile, or the way he looked straight into the lens, as if he knew I would eventually be on the other side of it. I drove out that afternoon. The woods looked the same. Sunlight through yellow leaves. Squirrels barking. I stood under the stand and looked up. The camera was angled exactly where he had left it. I adjusted it back. I checked the straps. Nothing else was touched. No trash. No boot prints I could see. I told myself to calm down. The forest absorbs people. That is what it does. Over the next week I checked the footage every morning. He was there every night. Sometimes he walked the trail slowly, passing under the stand at a measured pace, his head tilted up. Sometimes he stopped directly beneath it, and stood there for long stretches, motionless except for the slight sway that comes from balancing on uneven ground. The camera caught him at different times, 12:43 a.m., 3:07 a.m., 4:55 a.m., always after midnight, always alone. On the fourth night he climbed the tree. The footage showed him testing the trunk, finding the steps by feel. He climbed with the ease of someone who had done it before, his movements careful, unhurried. When he reached the platform, he turned and sat. He did not look around. He did not rifle through my gear. He sat facing the camera, knees bent, hands resting on his thighs, and stayed there until the batteries died. I remember noticing the detail that bothered me most. He had brought nothing with him. No pack. No flashlight. No visible weapon. He did not need light because he knew the tree. He did not need tools because the stand was already there. I stopped going out to the woods. That was not a decision so much as a realization. Each time I thought about driving out, my body reacted before my mind caught up. My chest felt tight. My mouth went dry. I started leaving the lights on at night. I checked the locks twice. I slept badly and dreamed of climbing without hands. The final clip came the morning I would normally hunt opening day. I had taken the day off work weeks earlier. The date circled on my calendar like it always was. I woke before dawn out of habit and lay there staring at the ceiling. I already knew I was not going. When I opened the folder, the timestamp was early. 5:58 a.m. The man was already in the stand. The sky behind him was just starting to gray. The camera caught his breath fogging faintly in the cold. He sat forward this time, elbows on his knees, eyes focused down the trail that leads from the parking pull-off. He did not look at the camera once. He was waiting. I closed the laptop and did not open it again for days. I reported the camera as tampered with, but I did not explain everything. I took the stand down a week later in the middle of the day, moving fast, flinching at every sound. I boxed the cameras and put them in the garage. I avoided that side of town. I told people I was busy. I told myself it was over. It was not over until a ranger called me. He had found my name on a map. The arrest happened after a hunter from another county reported missing gear, and followed boot prints deeper into the woods than he should have. The man they found had been living there for months in a series of hidden camps, moving with the seasons. He watched people. He learned their routines. He marked locations on printed maps with notes written small and neat along the margins. He kept newspapers folded to weather pages. He kept ropes coiled cleanly. He kept tools oiled and wrapped. The ranger explained it without drama. This was not the first time they had dealt with someone like him. He was not delusional. He was methodical. He admitted to watching hunters from elevated positions, learning when they arrived and how they moved through the trees. He described it as a study. He said he liked seeing fear arrive late. After understanding, they had found my stand marked with a circle. They had found my name written beside it, copied from a license plate or a permit posted at the trailhead. They had found dates. The ranger told me there was no indication he had hurt anyone yet. He was careful to say yet. Charges were being filed. The man would not be released back into the woods. I thanked him and hung up and sat very still. What stays with me now is not the footage, though I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes. It is the knowledge of how close routine comes to inviting harm. How patterns make paths for people who are looking for them. I had always believed the woods were neutral. That danger announced itself with noise or sudden movement. I had believed that familiarity was protection. I do not hunt that forest anymore. I do not hang cameras where I cannot see them. I still go outside. I still walk among trees. But I no longer assume that being alone means being unseen. I found the ad late on a Tuesday night while scrolling through a local Facebook group I followed mostly for lost pets and garage sale posts. I was half watching a cooking video, half bored, and not really looking for work. The post stood out because it was short and clean and written in a calm tone. One evening of babysitting in a gated suburban community. Good pay, 2 kids asleep by 8, no pets, snacks provided. It sounded easy, almost boring, which was exactly what I wanted. I had done babysitting on and off since high school, and nothing about it raised alarms at first. I clicked the profile. Middle-aged man, married according to his page. Pictures of a neat house, a lawn, a grill, a couple of holiday photos. Nothing strange. He messaged back quickly when I commented. We moved to private messages, and everything stayed normal. He explained that he and his wife were attending a late event. The kids were good sleepers. All I needed to do was stay until midnight and keep an eye on the baby monitor. He said he preferred sitters who didn't invite friends over and who were comfortable being alone. That also didn't feel unusual. The address came through shortly after. A quiet development about 20 minutes from me. I looked it up and saw it was one of those planned communities with matching houses, clean sidewalks, and a gate at the entrance. The kind of place that looks safe even in the dark. I agreed and put the night on my calendar. The evening arrived clear and cool. I drove out just before sunset, passing through the gate after giving my name to the guard. Everything looked calm. Porch lights coming on, sprinklers ticking softly, cars tucked neatly into driveways. I parked in front of the house and sat for a moment, gathering my bag and checking my phone. The house was 2 stories, light gray siding, white trim, no decorations. The garage door was closed. A single light was on inside. The door opened before I rang the bell. The man from the photos stood there, smiling, already wearing a jacket. He looked even more ordinary in person. Average height, clean hair, relaxed posture. He talked easily while letting me inside, filling the space with casual explanations about where things were and how the night would go. He showed me the kitchen, the living room, the bathroom I could use. Everything was spotless but not staged. No clutter, no mess. The kind of clean that suggests someone keeps control over their space. He said the kids were upstairs and already asleep. He pointed out the stairs but didn't take me up. He said they were light sleepers, and that checking on them too often wasn't necessary. He gestured to a baby monitor on the kitchen counter, already turned on. The screen showed a dark room with a crib barely visible. I noticed there was only 1 camera feed, not 2. He said the older one slept without a monitor. Again, nothing that felt clearly wrong. What did register was how much he talked. Not nervous talking, but steady, practiced conversation. He explained the alarm system in detail, how the doors locked automatically, how the garage sensor sometimes triggered if something moved near it. He said the neighborhood had raccoons and cats that sometimes slipped in when the door didn't close fully. He told me to lock the door behind him when he left, even though it would lock on its own. He repeated that point twice. It felt important to him. He left exactly on time. I watched his car pull away through the front window. I locked the door, double-checked it, and stood there for a moment listening to the quiet house settle. The hum of the refrigerator, The faint air system turning on. Nothing else. I set my bag down by the couch and kicked off my shoes. I scrolled on my phone and ate a granola bar from my bag. The baby monitor sat on the counter, still showing the same dark image. I turned the volume up slightly, just enough to hear if something changed. About 10 minutes later, a sharp beep cut through the quiet. Not loud, but sudden. It came from the panel near the door. The alarm screen lit up with a message indicating motion in the garage. My first thought was that I had misunderstood the system, that maybe it always did that when someone left. I stood still, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. I walked closer to the panel and read it again. Motion detected. Garage zone. The house itself remained silent. No alarm siren, just the notification beep repeating every few seconds. I felt a small rush of irritation mixed with nerves. I didn't want to mess anything up. I didn't want to trigger something I couldn't turn off. I messaged him to ask what I should do. He replied almost immediately, faster than I expected. He said it was probably raccoons and that it happened sometimes. He told me to ignore it unless it turned into a full alarm. The quick response reassured me for a moment. It suggested he was reachable and paying attention. Still, the beep continued. I stood there listening to it echo faintly down the hallway. The garage door was inside the house, off the kitchen. A heavy door with a keypad. I had noticed a camera feed icon on the alarm screen earlier, and now I saw a small button labeled garage camera. I hesitated, then pressed it. The screen shifted to a live feed. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The garage was lit by a single overhead bulb. Boxes lined the walls. A car was parked on one side. Near the door that led into the house, something dark stood motionless. My brain tried to interpret it as a shadow or a coat hanging on a hook. Then I realized it was a person. He stood inches from the door, facing it directly. Not moving, not looking around. Just standing there, his face angled toward where the camera was mounted. Toward the house. Toward me. It was him. He was wearing the same jacket. His hands hung at his sides. His expression was neutral, almost blank. There was no sense of him sneaking or hiding. He looked as if he had always been there, waiting. The sound in my ears disappeared. I couldn't hear the alarm beep anymore, even though it was still flashing on the panel. My mouth went dry. I stepped back without meaning to and bumped into the counter. The monitor stayed steady. He didn't move. He didn't react to the camera or to anything else. I checked the front door lock again, even though I had just locked it. It was secure. The windows were all closed. The only entrance from the garage was the door he stood in front of. I understood then why he had explained the system so carefully. He had wanted me to know how contained I was. I messaged him again, my hands shaking so badly. I almost dropped the phone. I told him I could see him in the garage. The response came back immediately, but it wasn't an explanation. It was calm reassurance, insisting that the feed must be delayed or looping, that he was already far away. The words didn't match what I was seeing with my own eyes. I looked back at the screen. He was still there, still watching the door, still completely still. Something shifted in my thinking then. A clear understanding settled in that I was not dealing with confusion or a technical issue. This was deliberate. This was planned. The house wasn't a safe place. The alarm wasn't for protection. It was a way to monitor. I grabbed my bag and went to the stairs, intending to get the kids and leave. Halfway up, I noticed something I hadn't before. The walls were bare. No family photos, no artwork, no handprints or drawings. The upstairs hallway light was off. I turned it on and walked toward the bedrooms. The first room was empty. No bed, no toys, just bare carpet and closed blinds. The second room was the same. The crib I had seen on the monitor wasn't there. No mattress, no sheets. The closet doors were open and empty. The bathroom was unused, no toothbrushes, no towels. The entire upstairs was a shell. The realization hit me all at once. There were no kids. There never had been. The monitor feed was staged. Everything I had been told was designed to keep me in the house. focused on a task that didn't exist. I heard a faint sound downstairs then. Not a bang or a crash. Just the soft click of the garage door handle being tested. That broke whatever freeze I was in. I didn't think anymore. I ran. I didn't bother with my bag or my shoes. I took the stairs 2 at a time, hit the front door, unlocked it, and ran barefoot onto the concrete. The night air was cold against my skin. I didn't look back. I ran down the street until my lungs burned. I didn't stop until I reached the guard gate, pounding on the glass until the guard opened the door. I must have looked unhinged, barefoot and shaking, but he called the police immediately when I said someone was inside the house. They went back with me. The house was empty when we arrived. The garage door stood open. The camera feed showed nothing but an empty room. The alarm log confirmed motion but no forced entry. There was no sign of children living there. No records of a family registered at the address. The car he had driven was gone. I gave my statement. I described everything as clearly as I could. The officers searched the house thoroughly. They found nothing illegal, nothing that explained his presence except for the setup itself. A staged monitor. A carefully explained system. A door that locked automatically from the inside. Later that night, when I finally got home, I checked the Facebook group. The ad was gone. The profile no longer existed. The messages showed as unavailable. In the days that followed, the police confirmed that the house was rented short-term under a false name. No neighbors had seen children. The gate logs showed his car leaving once and never re-entering. He had parked outside the camera range and accessed the garage through a side entrance common to the development. What stayed with me wasn't just the fear of that night. It was the patience behind it. The normal tone. The careful planning. The way he had stood in the garage without moving, confident that eventually I would open the door or freeze long enough for him to find another way in. I stopped babysitting after that. I stopped answering ads from strangers. Sometimes I still think about how easily it could have ended differently if I hadn't checked the camera. If I had trusted the explanation. If I had stayed focused on kids that were never there. The house was designed to feel safe. The situation was designed to feel routine. And the person behind it understood exactly how to use that against someone like me. I booked the red eye because it was cheap, and because I wanted the night to disappear. I had worked a double shift, packed in a rush, and convinced myself that sleeping upright for 5 hours was a fair trade for saving money. The airport at that hour felt hollowed out, like a building that had already given up on the day. Floors freshly mopped, lights too bright, announcements echoing longer than they should. Everyone moved with the same dull focus, dragging bags, checking phones, not looking at each other for more than a second. My seat assignment was the middle. I remember noticing it when I scanned the boarding pass and feeling that small irritation settle in my chest. I told myself it was temporary discomfort, nothing more. I found my row, stowed my bag under the seat, and sat down. The window seat was already taken by a woman, who immediately leaned toward the glass and pulled her hood up. The aisle seat was empty for a minute longer, long enough for me to hope it might stay that way. It didn't. He slid into the aisle seat just before the doors closed. Average height, average build, nothing about him that stood out in the way people usually mean when they say that. Clean clothes, neutral colors. He smelled faintly like soap and something metallic underneath. I assumed it was the recycled air, or my imagination catching on nothing. As the plane taxied, I tried to settle in. I pulled my headphones around my neck, but didn't turn anything on yet. My body was already heavy with exhaustion. I remember thinking that if I could fall asleep before takeoff, the night might pass without registering at all. That didn't happen. He angled his body slightly toward me. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to feel. His arm rested close to mine, not touching, but near enough that I was aware of the space between us. I felt that familiar social pressure. The unspoken expectation to acknowledge another human being when they signal interest. I didn't want to talk, but I didn't want to be rude either. I nodded when he looked at me. Once I did, there was no going back. He started sharing things immediately. Not small talk. Not weather or destinations. He talked about his work. The words came out steady and calm, like he was describing a routine task. He said he cleaned places after bad things happened. Not maintenance, not janitorial work. Aftermath. He explained how blood settles into grout, how fabric absorbs smells that never quite leave, how certain chemicals react differently depending on how long something has been left behind. I remember staring straight ahead while he talked, nodding when it felt required. My body reacted before my mind did. My shoulders tightened. My jaw locked. I became very aware of my breathing, of how shallow it was. I kept waiting for him to notice my discomfort and change the subject. He didn't. He watched me while he spoke, not in a casual way. His eyes kept flicking to my face, my hands, my mouth. It felt like he was tracking something specific, like he was measuring the effect of each detail he shared. When he described smells, I could almost taste them. Rusty and sweet. Chemical and rotten. I swallowed hard and felt my stomach roll. The woman by the window never moved. Her hood stayed up. Her breathing was slow and even. I wondered if she was asleep or pretending. I envied her either way. The plane leveled out. Lights dimmed. The low hum settled into a constant vibration that traveled through the seat and into my bones. Around us, people shifted and settled. A baby cried somewhere up front and then went quiet. The cabin fell into that strange suspended state that only exists on overnight flights, where time stretches and contracts at the same time. He kept talking. He mentioned how people always think they know what a scene will be like. He said they imagine it dramatic, violent, obvious. He explained that most of the time it was quiet. Empty rooms. Ordinary furniture. He said that was the hardest part, how normal everything looked afterward. Like the space itself didn't care what had happened inside it. I tried to focus on the safety card in the seat pocket. I read it slowly, line by line, even though I knew it by heart. My hands were folded in my lap. I could feel my wallet in my back pocket, the familiar outline pressing into the seat. That small physical reassurance grounded me more than anything else at that moment. At some point, he leaned closer. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough that his shoulder brushed mine. The contact sent a jolt through me. My heart started to beat faster. He lowered his voice slightly, though there was no one close enough to overhear. The words he said landed differently. They weren't graphic. They weren't even especially violent. They were observational, detached. He spoke about how easy it was to learn things about people without them realizing. How habits leave traces. How patterns repeat. I felt exposed in a way I couldn't articulate. Like the thin layer of anonymity that usually protects you in public spaces had been peeled back. When he commented on me directly, it felt like a shift. His attention sharpened. He said something about my expression, about how I reacted faster than most people. He said some people shut down completely, others lean in. He said I stayed present. He said that was interesting. I laughed, because that's what you do when you don't know what else to do. The sound came out wrong. Too loud, too brittle. It didn't change anything. The moment that lodged itself deepest into me happened quietly. No raised voice. No sudden movement. He leaned in a fraction closer and said something about how I looked like someone who wouldn't be missed right away. The words slid into my ear and settled there. They weren't delivered as a threat. They weren't even said with emphasis. They were observational, almost curious. My body went cold. I laughed again, softer this time, like I could smooth it over. My thoughts scattered. I became acutely aware of the narrowness of the seat, of how trapped my legs felt between his and the armrest. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself he was socially awkward, or trying to be edgy, or simply unaware of how his words landed. Then he reached into his bag. I watched his hand disappear into the dark opening. I remember noticing how steady it was. No rush, no hesitation. He pulled something out and held it low, near his thigh, angled so only I could see it. It was my wallet. For a second, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The shape was unmistakable. The worn edge, the small tear in the corner. I felt the sudden absence at the same time, the pressure against my back gone. A wave of heat rushed up my neck and into my face. I hadn't felt him touch me. I hadn't felt a hand near my pocket. I hadn't felt anything at all. He held it there for a moment, just long enough for the realization to settle fully. My pulse thudded in my ears. I felt lightheaded. The plane seemed to tilt slightly, though I knew it wasn't moving. Then he put it back in his bag. He leaned back in his seat like nothing had happened, his body language relaxed. He told me it was just practice. The word echoed in my head. Practice implied repetition. It implied intention. It implied that I was not unique. I didn't sleep after that. I sat rigid, eyes forward, hands clenched so tightly my fingers ached. I was hyper-aware of every movement around me, every rustle of fabric, every shift in weight. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, trying to pinpoint when he could have taken it. There was no clear answer. That terrified me more than anything else. At some point, he returned the wallet to me. He didn't make a show of it. He slipped it back the same way he had taken it, smoothly, without drawing attention. I felt it press against my lower back again. The familiar shape no longer felt comforting. It felt like proof of how easily something could be taken without my knowledge. The rest of the flight passed in a blur. He stopped talking. He closed his eyes and appeared to sleep. I watched him out of the corner of my eye the entire time. I memorized the slope of his nose, the shape of his hands, the faint scar near his knuckle. I told myself I was doing it so I could describe him later. I think part of me just needed to feel like I had taken something back. When the plane descended, my body felt hollow. My muscles were sore from tension. As we taxied to the gate, I felt a surge of relief so strong it almost made me dizzy. The illusion of safety returned the moment the seatbelt sign went off. People stood up. Overhead bins opened. The ordinary chaos of deplaning filled the cabin. He stood up too. He didn't look at me. He didn't touch me again. He blended seamlessly into the flow of passengers moving toward the exit. I waited until the aisle cleared before standing. My legs trembled. I had to grip the seat back in front of me to steady myself. The woman by the window finally stirred and stepped out ahead of me without a word. I reported it immediately. At the gate, I spoke to airline staff. My voice shook at first, then steadied as adrenaline took over. They listened with polite concern. They asked for details. I gave them everything I could remember. Description, seat number, time. They called airport security. I repeated the story again, slower this time, forcing myself to stay focused. They checked the manifest. There was no passenger listed under the name he had given. They checked ticket numbers, boarding records. Nothing matched. They reviewed the seating chart. According to their system, the aisle seat next to me had been unoccupied. I insisted someone had been there. Other passengers must have seen him. They reviewed camera footage from the jet bridge. They saw me board. They saw the woman by the window. They did not see him. They were careful with their words. They didn't accuse me of lying. They suggested stress, fatigue, misunderstanding. They asked if I had consumed alcohol or medication. They asked if I had a history of anxiety. I left the airport feeling smaller than when I arrived. The sun was just starting to rise. The sky was pale and washed out. Everything looked normal in a way that felt obscene. In the days that followed, I replayed the flight endlessly. I checked my wallet obsessively, counting cards, touching it to reassure myself it was real. I read articles about pickpockets, about social engineering, about people who blend into crowds. I learned how often crimes go unreported, how rarely predators are caught when they don't leave obvious damage behind. I filed a police report. It went nowhere. Without a name, a face on record, or evidence beyond my own account, there was nothing to pursue. Time passed. The intensity faded, but the imprint remained. I became more vigilant. I sat differently in public spaces. I kept my bag zipped and in front of me. I noticed hands. I noticed eyes. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the word he used. Practice. I think about how confident he was, how casual. I think about how easily he took something from me without my awareness. I think about how he returned it, not because he had to, but because he chose to. What unsettles me most is not the idea that he wanted to hurt me. It is the possibility that he didn't care enough to try. That I was simply a rehearsal, a measurement, a way to pass the time on a long overnight flight. I know now that the most dangerous people are not always the ones who make themselves obvious. Sometimes they sit next to you in a narrow row, speak in a calm voice, and watch your reactions like data points. Sometimes they leave without a trace, and the only proof they were ever there is the space they briefly occupied, and the way you never quite sit the same way again. I rented the storage unit because my life had collapsed into objects. After the divorce, the house sold fast and cheap, and everything I owned that didn't fit into my apartment ended up boxed and labeled by room and emotion. Kitchen things I didn't need because I stopped cooking. Camping gear I didn't want to look at because it reminded me of weekends that no longer existed. Old paperwork. Tools. Furniture I couldn't bring myself to throw away. I told myself the unit was temporary. Just a place to put things until I figured out who I was supposed to be next. The facility sat behind a grocery store and a closed, down tire shop. A long, low building painted beige, with a keypad gate and security cameras that looked newer than the place itself. The sign out front promised climate control and 24-hour access. That mattered to me because my schedule was a mess. Sleep came when it came. Nights were easier than days. They assigned me Unit B17. The manager walked me down the hallway on my first visit. The air inside cool and dry, smelling faintly of dust and cleaning solution. Rows of metal doors stretched in both directions, identical except for the stenciled numbers. The sound of our footsteps echoed more than it should have. He unlocked the door, rolled it up, and flicked on the light. The unit was empty, concrete floor clean, walls unmarked. It felt neutral, like a pause. I brought my things over in pieces, loading and unloading alone, stacking boxes neatly, leaving an aisle down the center so I could reach everything. I liked the order of it. I liked knowing exactly where things were. Sometimes I sat on the floor of the unit longer than I needed to, just breathing, letting the quiet settle around me. The place had a way of flattening sound. Even when other people were around, it felt distant, like they were underwater. The folding chair appeared about 3 weeks after I rented the unit. I noticed it immediately because it was sitting open against the left wall, where I knew there had been nothing the night before. It was one of those cheap metal chairs with a fabric seat, the kind people bring to kids' soccer games. Gray, slightly frayed at the edges, folded and unfolded enough times that it held its shape loosely, like it was tired. At first I thought I had forgotten it. Divorce does strange things to memory. You lose track of what belongs to which version of your life. I stood there staring at it, trying to place it. I ran through my last few trips in my head. Boxes, tool chest, lamp, no chair. I didn't own anything like that. I checked the unit number on the door. B17. I checked the lock, mine. I walked the aisle, looked left and right, made sure I hadn't accidentally rolled up the wrong door. Everything lined up. I told myself it must have been a mistake by the staff. Maybe someone used the wrong unit while showing a space. Maybe a cleaner left it behind. I folded it up and leaned it in the corner, out of the way, and finished what I came to do. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next time I came back, the chair was unfolded again, positioned closer to the center of the unit, angled toward the opening as if it had been used. That's when the unease settled in properly. Not panic, not fear, just a steady, low pressure behind my ribs. I left it where it was and locked up. A week later, there was a thermos sitting on the chair. It was stainless steel dented, the lid screwed on tight. There was no logo, no stickers. It looked used. Not new enough to be forgotten by accident. Not old enough to be trash. I didn't touch it. I didn't open it. I stood in the doorway and stared at it until my hands started to shake. I went straight to the office. The manager was the same man who had shown me the unit. He listened while I explained, nodding, his face neutral in a way that felt practiced. He pulled up the camera footage for the hallway outside B17. We watched days go by in fast motion, people moving in and out, doors opening and closing, carts rolling past. Nothing stopping at my unit except me. He rewound and played it again slower. Still nothing. He suggested I might have forgotten I brought the items myself. He didn't say it outright, but it was there in the tone, the careful way he spoke, like he didn't want to embarrass me. I thanked him and left, feeling small and foolish and unsettled all at once. After that, I started checking the unit every day. I didn't need to be there that often. There was nothing urgent inside, but I needed to see it, to confirm what was real. Sometimes nothing had changed. Sometimes something small was different. The chair would be shifted a few inches. The thermos moved from the seat to the floor, then back again. Once there was a folded blanket draped over the chair, brown and heavy, like the kind people keep in their car trunks. I never saw anyone. I never heard footsteps nearby when I was there. The changes always happened between visits. I brought a second lock and added it to the door. It didn't help. The manager showed me the footage again. Still nothing. I stopped telling anyone about it. Friends already looked at me, with a kind of careful concern since the divorce, like I might break if they pressed too hard. I didn't want to give them another reason to doubt me. Instead, I started staying later. The facility was quieter after 10. The lights hummed softly. The air felt heavier, warmer somehow, even though the temperature never changed. I would sit in my car outside for a while, watching the entrance, then go in and walk the aisles slowly, listening. Nothing ever happened while I was there. The unit stayed exactly as I had left it. It was only when I was gone that things moved. That was what finally pushed me to stay. I planned it carefully, in a way that embarrassed me even as I did it. I brought a book and my phone charger and a bottle of water. I wore dark clothes. I parked on the far side of the lot, away from the cameras I knew about. I waited until almost 11 to go inside. I rolled up the door to B17 just enough to slip in and then pulled it back down, leaving a narrow gap at the bottom. I positioned myself behind the door, pressed against the wall, heart pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. From there, I could see the lower part of the aisle through the gap, shoes passing by, wheels of carts. Nothing else. Time stretched. Minutes felt thick and slow. My legs cramped. My mouth went dry. I kept expecting to hear something, but the building stayed quiet. At 11:40, I saw a pair of shoes stop in front of my unit. They were work shoes, scuffed, practical. The person stood there for a moment, perfectly still. Then keys jingled softly, close enough that I could feel the sound more than hear it. The lock turned. The door rolled up smoothly, practiced as if it had been done many times before. Light flooded the unit. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, then opened them again, keeping my body pressed flat against the wall, barely breathing. A man stepped inside. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look around. He moved like he belonged there. He locked the door behind him with a key that fit. My key. He walked to the chair, unfolded it fully, and sat down. He placed the thermos on the floor beside him. He adjusted the blanket over his knees. Then he leaned back and waited. I watched his feet, his hands, the slow rise and fall of his chest. He was patient, comfortable. This was not a mistake or a curiosity. This was routine. I don't know how long I stayed hidden. My sense of time collapsed into my pulse and the ache in my legs. Eventually, the pressure inside me became too much. I shifted, just slightly. The sound of fabric brushing concrete was enough. The man's head turned toward me immediately. I stepped out. He looked pleased. Not surprised, not startled. Pleased. Like something had finally gone according to plan. He brought his hands together and clapped slowly, deliberately, the sound echoing off the metal walls. I don't remember the details of his face as well as I remember the feeling of being seen. Not noticed. Not observed. Seen? In a way that stripped me down to something smaller and weaker than I had ever felt. He had been paying attention to me. To my routines. To my life reduced to boxes and visits and empty evenings. He stood up and looked around the unit, at my things, at the labels on the boxes, at the narrow aisle I had left for myself. His attention moved over the space like a hand. He conveyed, without words, an appreciation for places like this, for what they held beyond furniture and paperwork, for the fragments people packed away when they ran out of room inside themselves. That was enough. I backed away, fumbled with the door, got it open, and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was in my car with the doors locked, gasping like I had been underwater too long. I called the police from the parking lot. They took me seriously in a way I hadn't expected. 2 cars arrived within minutes. They went inside with me and found the unit empty. The chair was there. The thermos. The blanket. No man. They dusted for prints. They checked the locks. They reviewed the footage themselves. Again, nothing. But this time, they didn't suggest I was mistaken. The next day, they called me and asked me not to return to the facility. They found another unit, 3 doors down, that had been rented under a false name. Inside were containers sealed carefully, labeled in the same neat handwriting I had seen on my own boxes. Inside those containers were human remains, disassembled, preserved, stored with care. The man was caught 2 weeks later in a different city, trying to rent another unit. I terminated my contract. I never went back for my things. I replaced what I needed. I let the rest go. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that chair. About the patience it represented. About the way some people find comfort in the quiet spaces where others hide what they can't carry anymore. I understand now that the unit was never just a place to store my past. It was a place someone else was waiting. I hired him during a stretch of my life when I was tired all the time and trying to simplify things. I had just moved into the apartment, a ground floor unit in a quiet complex built in the late 90s, beige siding, thin walls, cheap carpet that never quite looked clean, no matter how much I vacuumed. My job had shifted to longer hours, unpredictable schedules, and my dog was still young, full of energy, not suited to being alone all day. I told myself that using an app was modern, efficient, and safe. The profiles were clean and cheerful. Everyone smiled in their photos. He stood out because he looked normal in a way that felt reassuring. No forced grin, no dramatic bio, just a short paragraph about loving animals, having grown up with dogs, and being reliable. 5-star reviews, dozens of them. People thanked him by name for being punctual and gentle. I remember thinking that if something ever went wrong, there would be a record of it. That illusion mattered more to me than I realized. The first time he came by, my dog hesitated at the door. That wasn't completely unusual. He had always been cautious with strangers, especially men, but usually curiosity won out within seconds. This time he leaned back, paws braced on the floor, nails clicking as he resisted the leash. His ears flattened, and he made a soft whining sound that felt out of place, thin and strained. I laughed it off, embarrassed, tugged gently, and handed over the leash. I told myself dogs pick up on moods, and I was anxious about trusting someone new. That explanation satisfied me, because it was easy and required no further thought. Over the next week, the pattern repeated. Every time the doorbell rang at the same late, morning hour, my dog retreated toward the hallway. He would circle behind me, tail low, body tight, whining again. Once he pressed his head into my leg hard enough that I almost stumbled. After the walker left, my dog would pace the apartment, nose low to the floor, sniffing corners and door frames like something had changed. When they returned from the walk, he was always quiet, subdued in a way that didn't match a long walk. He drank water and lay down without enthusiasm, eyes following the walker as if tracking him until the door closed. I noticed small things then, things I didn't know how to name yet. The couch cushions were sometimes shifted. The throw blanket I kept folded on the armrest would be draped differently. Not wrong, just different. Once, a kitchen drawer was not pushed in all the way. Another time, my bedroom door, which I always closed out of habit, was open. I told myself I was tired and forgetful. I was working long days, sometimes nights. The human brain is very good at smoothing over inconsistencies when acknowledging them would create discomfort. I had installed an indoor camera after a break in Scare in the complex the previous year. It faced the living room, mostly the front door and couch. I rarely checked it. The presence of it mattered more than the footage. One afternoon, after coming home to find my bedroom pillow slightly indented, as if someone had rested a head there and then smoothed it back out, I opened the app. I scrolled back through the day, half expecting to see nothing, half hoping I was wrong. The footage loaded slowly, grainy at first, then clear. The front door opened. He stepped inside with my dog. He unhooked the leash and hung it on the hook by the door. My dog stood still, rigid, staring down the hallway. The man did not move for a long moment. He stood in the middle of my living room, hands at his sides, head tilted slightly as if listening. Not to the dog, not to the camera, but to the walls themselves. He turned his head slowly, methodically, facing the kitchen, then the bedroom, then the shared wall with my neighbor. He remained like that for minutes. The timestamp crept forward while nothing changed. Eventually, he sat on my couch. He didn't slouch or relax. He sat upright, feet flat on the floor, hands resting on his thighs, eyes unfocused, listening. My dog paced in small circles, stopping to sniff the air near the bedroom door, whining softly. The man stood again and walked into the kitchen. He opened drawers one by one, slowly, carefully, not rummaging, just opening and closing, as if checking their contents against a list in his head. He opened my refrigerator and stared inside for a long time before closing it gently. Then he walked down the hall. The camera did not cover the bedroom, but I could see the edge of the doorway. He stepped inside. My dog did not follow. The timestamp jumped again. When he emerged, his hair was slightly flattened on one side. He returned to the living room and lay down on my bed, facing couch, head on the armrest, eyes open, staring upward. He stayed there until nearly the end of the scheduled walk time. Then he stood, clipped the leash back on my dog and left. I sat on my floor and watched the footage again and again, until the sounds of my apartment felt different, heavier. The hum of the refrigerator sounded intrusive. The neighbor's muffled television through the wall made my skin prickle. I checked other days. The pattern was there, subtle variations of the same behavior. Sometimes he stood longer. Sometimes he sat on the floor. Once he pressed his ear against the wall, separating my unit from the next. Another time, he lay fully on my bed, shoes off, arms folded over his chest, staring at the ceiling fan. I confronted him through the app because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't raise my voice, because there was no voice involved. I described what I had seen in careful, factual terms. The response came quickly. He did not apologize. He explained that his job was to care for the dog, and that the rest of the space had not been restricted. He framed it as a misunderstanding, a matter of unclear expectations. There was no anger in his tone, no defensiveness. Just calm, as if discussing scheduling or payment. I reported him to the app. I sent the footage. They responded with scripted concern and told me they would investigate. They refunded the recent walks and removed him from my account. For a few days, that felt like enough. I changed my locks anyway. I moved the camera to cover more of the apartment. I slept poorly. My dog followed me from room to room, refusing to settle unless he could see me. Weeks passed. The edges of the memory dulled, as memories do. I still jumped at noises, still double-checked locks. but the immediate terror faded into something quieter, more manageable. Then I saw the news. A woman from a nearby neighborhood had gone missing. The article mentioned her dog being found tied to a fence several blocks from her home. The photo showed a familiar face. The same neutral expression, the same forgettable haircut. The story filled in details over the next few days. He had been hired to walk her dog as well. Surveillance footage placed him near her apartment building. He had accessed her unit. There were timelines, gaps, unanswered questions that eventually resolved into arrests and charges. The police contacted me after finding my report in the app's records. I handed over everything. They told me that my footage helped establish a pattern, that his behavior in my apartment matched what they suspected in others. He had been studying routines, listening through walls, learning schedules. The apartment layouts were similar. Ground floor units, thin walls, dogs as an excuse for access. Nothing happened quickly after that. The legal process stretched on. I followed updates in the local paper until the trial concluded. He was convicted. The missing woman was never found alive, but enough evidence existed to explain what had happened to her. Where and how. There were no mysteries left in the official sense. No unanswered questions that could be resolved by more information. I moved out of that apartment. I sold the couch. I replaced the mattress. I kept the dog close. I stopped using apps that promised convenience and safety through ratings and stars. I understood then how easy it was to mistake familiarity for trust, how much faith we place in systems designed to make things simpler. I still think about the quiet moments on that footage, the way he listened to the walls, patient and intent, as if the building itself was speaking to him. That image never faded the way the rest did. It stayed sharp, a reminder that the most dangerous things often arrive politely, with credentials and good reviews, and wait patiently for permission.